Welcome. I'm Andrew Kohut. I'm the president of the Pew Research Center. We're delighted to co-sponsor this event with the National Committee on U.S.-China Relations. We're here to discuss public opinion, Chinese public opinion about the world and about the United States, and world opinion about China. Our discussion will be led by Steve Orlins, president of the National Committee. We are delighted to have Victor Yuan, head of Horizon Research here, who will join me in this discussion of public opinion. Of course, you will participate in this discussion after we've had a few minutes to have our say. Victor is a pioneer in the field of opinion research and market surveys in China. He founded Horizon, a research consultancy group, which has overseen more than 5,000 projects for local and global companies, including the Pew Research Center. He has expertise in peer culture research, marketing research, brand consulting, and many things. He holds a PhD in sociology from Peking University, and he has an MPA from Masters of Public Administration, that is, from the JFK School at Harvard. I will turn this discussion over to Steve, who will moderate, and I guess we can just do it from there.
Yeah. Okay. Great, Andy, thank you so much. Let me just reiterate what a pleasure it is that we can co-host this with the Pew Research Center. It's one of these programs where you kind of say, well, when I started in China, you wouldn't believe that we could have discussions of polling in attitudes in China towards the United States and attitudes in the United States towards China. I mean, it's a testimony to the progress that China has made, and that we have two of the outstanding pollsters on each side of the Pacific, and it's wonderful. But I don't want to use any of our precious time, because this is such a wonderful topic, going over the bios which you have of these two outstanding individuals. I would just make one comment, because there was a poll released yesterday. I guess General Few is not here from the Committee of 100, but they just commissioned a poll on a similar subject, and I would just say that this topic was arrived at through a conversation between Ann Phelan and Andy, and came up with the idea of this, and it's purely coincidental that this is occurring the day after the release of this poll. But it's great timing, I think, from everyone's perspective. But with no further ado, let me turn it. Oh, An Ping is here from the Committee of 100, who did sponsor that poll. But let me turn it over to Victor to talk for 10 minutes, then Andy to talk for 10 minutes, then for me to ask questions for 40 minutes. No, for me to ask questions for a few minutes, and then turn it over to you to ask some questions.
Thank you, Steve. People ask me what's the difference between yesterday's talk and today's talk. Yesterday we have this conference here with the Committee 100. That study is more about the latest mirror study between China and American, as how American look at China and how Chinese look at American. But today I would more look back to the past 8 or 10 years. Of course, we do start 12 years ago to start to have a so-called Chinese international perception study, and look at how Chinese look at the outside of the China, and especially about American. Not surprised at that time if we ask a question to typical Chinese, we ask about, how you look at American, or how to perceive the relation between China and American. The typical answer is, I don't know. I think that is because of either not enough information, but also that they are not to say anything about diplomatic relations, because that's kind of things, it's decided by the leader. If I say anything wrong, I make trouble for myself. Nowadays, it's more easier. I still got like 7-8% of people say, I don't know. Maybe they really don't know, but a few of them, because of a concern about it, they will be arrested, so they're not to speak out their idea. So if we got a chance to look back what happened in the past 10 years, I think the most important thing is that people got more international information. And nowadays, if you look at either the China Daily or the newspaper like Global Times, which is one of the bestseller in China, and there was so many. That's a daily newspaper. There was so many information about, especially about the United States, European, Japan, Korea, and also about Taiwan. And people easier to access to internet source to check information. But what about the specific change? What kind of the view on American what changed or something not changed? I will talk about 3 points. First, about overview attitude to US, especially about positive and the negative side. That's really changed a lot. The last year of Clinton administration, that's 2000. And in China, there are about 60% of Chinese people, they do have a pretty positive attitude to the United States. And this positive attitude is really rise to peak after President Clinton's visit to China, especially he say 3 no's policy to Taiwan. He got to achieve a pretty high appreciation. But the first year of Bush administration, he got 39, basically 39 the positive attitude from China side. And then the coming years, we have a 36, 37, 20, 40, and 50. It's basically we got to the bottom, and then we have a slowly increasing of positive attitude to the United States. So this is basically now the attitude to American is a pretty, compared to the beginning of the Bush administration, is pretty positive. It's about half of Chinese. They do have, more than half of Chinese, they do have a pretty positive attitude to the United States. Of course, if we talk about the positive and the negative, we do need to consider about what kind of factor impact that attitude. And especially if we look at there are the relations between the 2 countries. So I come out to the second point. Is actually we do have that kind of a very interesting so-called multi-dimensional perception, which is not simply negative or simply positive. Nowadays, if for the Chinese, especially for the young generation, and of course more about for this educated Chinese, they have a more sense about the so-called common interest between the 2 countries. So where is a place that people perceive the 2 countries that do have more so-called common interest? The place like trade, energy, environmental, anti-terrorism, and also even for the domestic stability in China, it's not only bring the benefits to Chinese and also bring the benefits to even the United States. I still remember in 1992, and Mr. Deng Xiaoping at that time, he said that if we do have a suffer from the instability in China, and the country around China, and some other countries, suffer a lot, have such a big refugee population, no country really can afford that. So this is somewhere people felt that, grew in a sense about so-called common interest, especially for trade and environmental issue. But somewhere we do see the Chinese public do see the conflict between China and the U.S. The top issue is Taiwan issue, and also some others like trade disputes and also environmental issues, and even about controlling the energy resource globally. The Taiwan issue is compared to Clinton's administration, it become even more sensitive. And the reason is if we check about our polling about the Taiwan issue itself, because people have a rising concern about Taiwan's independence. And when the people look at Taiwan's chance to move to that direction, and why they believe that Taiwan's current leaders would be, more encouraged to do that because with American hidden support. So that's basically, it's at least people understand that Americans manipulate the situation there. Interesting, if you look at President Bush's visit to China compared to Clinton's visit to China. Before Clinton's visit to China, that's 1999. Before his visit, he personally got about 27% positive attitude to himself. After he visited, he got 79. And before President Bush's visit, he got 32 positive. After his visit, he got 28. And the reason is that during Clinton's visit, he clearly claimed the 3-no policy to China. But during President Bush's visit to China, basically he said that we have a one China policy, but we also have the duty to, implement the law with the relation with Taiwan. So that's probably for the general public was a very strong sense that basically an American got a benefit from the manipulate the situation, even the intention situation between Taiwan Strait. This so-called multi-dimensional relation is not simply about the specific issues, but also with some of the fundamental consideration. Actually, the general public, and including the elites community, was a pretty positive attitude to the many American things, including American education. And if a list of the countries would like to send the kids to accept overseas education, American rank at top. And also the countries that was favor culture items, including movie, music. And also this is a place that believe was the best science and technology. And also it is a place that they believe they can find the best management experience. And if you look at most of the Chinese students and also Chinese research business community members, they are so-called accepted management and business education. Majority of them are educated as American MBA style education. Actually, last year we checked about the book in the market. Each 100 book, if a foreign related, 80 about American. And each 100 management books, 92 is translated from English or translated from the business school materials from here. So then you can see, basically that's create a kind of a way that people basically, they look at American things as a kind of criteria or standard. And also, from the morality side, they also believe, Americans represent a kind of a good morality and provide a good ethical model for Chinese. We have the polling research about the most influential and best multinational company in China. Among the top 100, American company have 72, and around 10 belong to Germany. The rest belong to other countries. So even about the American system, democracy, and 62% of Chinese believe that's the best democracy in the world. So if you look at all those things, it's basically American general, all the best things in the world. But why there's still there are limited level of positive attitude to American because of policy. And what kind of things people really don't like American? First, they don't like the way of so-called hegemonism, right? Or the police way. And also, even the Chinese people like American democracy, but they don't like Americans' way to treat the Chinese way. Because it's basically like, yeah, you have a good policy, but, this is my affairs. You should not do it that way, deal with me. And also, there's a very strong sense that the Chinese culture and American culture is quite different. When we test all the things about attitude to family, to kids' education, and to something like right and wrong, and also relation between friends, more than 80% of Chinese believe we have a different attitude, a different criteria with American. So I think that's heavily impacted so-called the way how to treat us, and also the way how you look at us. So I think that's how we understand the so-called public attitude to America. The third, I would point out, if you look at the research, basically, when people look at the relation between America and China, we can come to the conclusion that economically, the relation is very important. And actually, America will be regarded as the most important economic partner. And also, the trade with America generates pretty positive benefits to Chinese. And also, all the good brands people can associate with, the top 100, actually 82 come from American company. So basically, if you look at what is the so-called quality life, which is American relevant, and we have a rising middle class, and the young kids is very much like American young kids, and they're pretty open and open to the outside, and they look at the international things kind of, the most important part of their own life. So when I look at the so-called internationalization, actually basically it's more Americanized economically. But if you look at in international security, that's not the case. It's basically American is regarded as a country are most unfriendly to China. Only in the past 8 years, only 1 year, Japan is number one, American is next. And all other 7 years, American will rank at the top countries most unfriendly to China. Russia now is regarded as the most friendly country to China, and also in international security, and Russia provide the most important strategic support to China. So that's, I think, if our latest polling about the American, that basically 67% of Chinese regard American are still most unfriendly country to China politically and from the international policy side. And which is, of course, the top year would be 2004. That's 77% of Chinese regarded American as the most unfriendly country to China. So I think in that part, it still need a lot to try to build up the mutual trustment and the mutual understanding between the two countries. It's not only about the economic side, but also the international security side. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. I failed to mention that these cameras are for a webcast that we're going to do. They're not from outside media. I'm going to talk about the global image of China with some emphasis on the United States, but more about the way the world more generally looks at China. The material that I'm going to discuss comes from the Pew Global Attitudes Project, which has been an ongoing series of international surveys since 2002. We've interviewed more than 160,000 people in 60 countries, and waves of this was broken up in waves of surveys each year since 2002, obviously. Much of what we've dealt with has been the image of the United States, but increasingly we've also been polling about how the world sees China, and I'm going to talk about how the world sees China. I think the lead of our report this year dealt with continuing anti-Americanism, but it was global unease with world powers, not with just the United States. And there are clear parallels, growing parallels between views about China and the United States. To use your term, opinions about China are multidimensional, and to a certain extent they're mixed. In the survey that we did this year in 47 countries, in 27 of the 47 countries, there was a majority favorable view of China. And in just 5 was there a decidedly negative view of China. The American comparison is similar but different in one significant way. For the U.S., favorable views in 25 of 47 countries, but decidedly negative in 17 countries. For the most part, favorable views of China are found in neighboring countries, in Pakistan, in Indonesia, in Malaysia. For example, in Pakistan, 67% of the Pakistanis that we poll say they have a good opinion or a favorable view of China. And in most African countries. China has a very, very positive image in Africa, which I'll detail a little bit more later. But Asian publics demonstrate a mixed view of China. China is considered both a top ally and a top threat by a number of Asian countries. That includes notably Indonesia and South Korea. And certainly, as Victor has noted, in the way the Chinese see it is quite correct, the Japanese have a very unfavorable view of China, and it's grown such over the past 5 years. 67% of the Japanese people that we polled this year said that they had a negative view of China, but we see a growing negative view of China in Western Europe. In Italy, 61% negative, in Germany, 54%, and France, 51%. While views of China are mostly favorable, as I've noted, they've soured in recent years. Over the past few years, we have trends in 15 countries, and of those 15 countries, opinion of China has become less positive in 9. The comparison, by the way, for the United States is we have trends in 33 countries over this period, and opinions have become more negative in 26 of 33 countries. The biggest declines in favorable views of China occur in 2 regions. First, in Asia, among the Japanese, the South Koreans, and the Indians, but also, as I noted earlier, in Western Europe, notably Britain, France, Germany, and Spain. One of the unusual things that I noticed in the survey, and I don't have an explanation for this, but I'll tell you about it, is that opinion of China is more favorable in the West among English-speaking countries, in Canada, Britain, and even to a lesser extent in the United States, than it is in non-English-speaking countries, including France, Spain, Germany, even Sweden. And the Swedes are pretty positive about most everything, but less positive about China. I don't quite know why this is. It might just be an anomaly, but there might be something for further research, Victor. People all around the world, we get to the multidimensional aspect of this, people all around the world worry about China's military power. In 32 of the 46 countries that we've polled, obviously excluding China, that's why it doesn't add to 47, people say that China's rising military power is a bad thing for their country. Concerns are greatest among neighboring countries in South Korea and Japan, where 80% say that this is a bad thing. Also, China's other neighbors, clear majorities of Indians and Russians say that growing Chinese military power is a bad thing. In contrast, for the most part, and I want to emphasize for the most part, China's rising economic power is seen as a good thing. But that's true in 33 of the 46 countries in which we made the poll this year. But there is significant growing concern about China's economic power in India, Britain, Germany, Italy, and France. All of these countries in which the overall image of China has slipped. Clearly, nearly all of China's other neighbors say what's good for the Chinese economy is good for them. But 2 neighbors stand apart, and that is South Korea and India. They see rising Chinese economic power as a bad thing. Chinese growing presence on the world stage is clearly evident in Africa and Latin America. We did surveys in 7 Latin American countries as part of our poll this year, in 10 sub-Saharan African countries, and majorities in most of these countries in these 2 regions say that China is exerting a fair amount of influence on what goes on in their country. And that was the case in 8 of the 10 African countries, and it was the case in 4 of the 7 Latin American countries. And even in the countries where it wasn't majority view, very significant minorities said that China was having an influence. Chinese influence is seen as rivaling the American influence in many of these places. Looking at Africa and major nations, Ethiopia, South Africa, and Nigeria, equally huge numbers say that China and the U.S. are having a direct influence on what goes on in their countries. Greater numbers in Senegal, Mali, and Ivory Coast say China is having an impact and say that about America. And in greater numbers in Ghana, Uganda, and Kenya, see the American influence is greater. But in all of these cases, both China and the United States are seen as having a big impact. In all 7 countries in Latin America, however, even though many see a Chinese influence, the American influence continues to be seen as greater. Even though 8 and 10 of the sub-Saharan African countries like the American influence, in 8 of these countries, a greater percentage say that the Chinese influence is positive. So China is really the image of China is really riding quite high in Africa. In Latin America, it's a much more mixed and divided issue. In China, China's influence is well regarded in Venezuela, Chile, Bolivia, and Peru, while the U.S. image is not seen as positive there. In Brazil, Mexico, and Argentina, neither the American influence or the Chinese influence is seen as a good thing. The Latin Americans are far more skeptical than the Africans. And Steve, I'm going to leave it there.
Andy, thank you. It's terrific. Let's try to dig down for a minute. And there seems to be a difference, and this is both for Victor and Andy. Some of the polling data I've looked at suggests a difference in perceptions between the elite and the public of China in the United States, and of the elite and the public in China of the United States. Where in the United States, the elite seem to view China more negatively or less favorably than the public, and in China, the elite seems to view the United States more positively than the public. First, tell me if I'm reading this accurately, and second, give me a sense of why, and third, since the National Committee is trying to promote constructive relationships, what should we be doing about it?
Please.
Yeah. I do see the Chinese elites are more positive to Americans, America as a country, and also even to the American policy. First, I would say the Chinese elites are the most important part to shape the public opinion. If you look at what different kind of dimension or a mechanism how the public opinion be shaped. I think the people with a more independent thinking would not be, because even for the elites, you have different kinds of elites from the more like a liberal side or more positive side. But in China, the elites can make voice. Basically, is a one side. So that's elites. They give their idea on news media, and the media impact public. So in that sense, basically, the idea from elites and public is more consistency. If you compare to the domestic issue, that's a more diversified, because for domestic issue, people have their own experience, so they're not necessarily just listen to what elites talk about. Second, the Chinese elites, I would say, is heavily be impacted by American idea. And most of them are if they know any foreign language, that's English. If they read any foreign newspaper, that's American newspaper. If I read access to any website, foreign website, that's American website. If they get to any visiting or studying education program, that's American university. So in many sense, that's basically many of their idea was shaped. When I talk about the Chinese public, they worship or they look up on those American issues, and that's quite accurate reflector the situation in the elite community. So in that sense, they are even more positive to American the things, and I think the change would be before. The whole thing is that people don't have their independent idea. And today, for the young generation, they are more informative. They have a more independent mentality, and they would be capable to find the information from the internet, from even they're much good at English and other foreign language. So for the new generation, and also I believe that for the new young elites group, that would be more diversified, not necessarily would be just the follow the older way. I would say, especially for the single child generation, because now they are become adult. And because single child, they don't like the way of the traditional Chinese authority. And then they even more hate the American world police way, because they simply don't like that. Anybody, including the party, Communist Party, and all American, no matter who you are. If you use that way, I just don't like it. So, and in many sense, the young elites either would be more people that will move to the part that will be pro so-called westernized democracy, or they even become more nationalistic, the stronger nationalist sentimental. They even more with that kind of anti the hegemonism, the style, the way, because that's just the way the older the grandparents or the traditional authority would they have. So that's my understanding about it.
I think there are some gaps between American elite opinion and American public opinion. One of the most significant gaps, I think, has to do with attentiveness. I don't think the American public's paying a lot of attention to China. The attention to China came diminished rapidly after 9/11, and since then, China isn't, in geopolitical terms, not much on the public's radar screen. Americans have other concerns. I think from the public's point of view, the economic issues with respect to China, issues surrounding the importation of Chinese products that are not seen as safe are bigger deals. For the elites, I think there's more ongoing concern about the geopolitical issues, China's military power, and certainly Taiwan. I mean, if you ask the average American about Taiwan and what it means to them, you wouldn't get much. And you didn't get much even when there were stories about Taiwan was a more pressing issue. So I think that the foreign policy establishment, the security people, have an eye on China in a way that eludes the average American. Americans look at China more as a place of products which are attractive in terms of price, but an economic power that is threatening with regard to jobs. China is on a long list of countries that Americans worry about with respect to their jobs and the vitality of the American labor force.
Interesting perspective. This may be one where I would come out saying maybe this is one where the people have got it right and the elite have got it wrong. Where the people's view of what's going on in China is actually more accurate, less driven by special interests than the elites. Let's talk about accuracy of polling, Victor. As anybody who works with me knows, I am an avid consumer of polls. I can never get enough of them. When I was in politics, you would take your polls, you would try to buy as much media as you could and move the numbers. And that's what any political campaign is going to be doing. Now, when you look at China and you're polling, now I'm talking about commercial polling. If you're doing a poll on products, I'll put that aside. But when you're talking about political polling on political issues, when the government is controlling the media, what do the polls really mean? What are we really being told? Or is it, if the government wants to move the needle on Taiwan, or if the government wants to move the needle on the environment, if this were a political campaign in the United States, we'd say, well, we'll buy a lot of advertising, we'll attack the other side, and we'll move the needle. So how much do we really learn from political as opposed to commercial polling in China?
The polling, the way how to use the polling, I think it's in China is quite different with the situation in the United States. First, polling is kind of things would be pretty weird to many decision makers, and because they say basically those people they don't have any special information. They even don't understand what I'm talking about. Why you can do polling and get any valuable message from them. So actually, I have many officials and even the boards of the Chinese company. They do have that kind of feeling, but gradually you have a more government commission, and from government they trust us to do the study. I think that basically the reason is a changing of political times. Of course, people here will not see too much substantial change of Chinese government system. But actually, there's one substantial change is about the end of a super political man. The political superman, all of them are died. So nowadays, those people, why they sit there? Simply, they say, we are more capable. Our performance is stronger and better. How can legitimate that? How can justify that? You must, show more performance. So it is a time of a so-called performance-focused time. Then the performance, who said that you have a good performance? Of course, you can say, I said I have a good performance. That's the traditional way. But the people simply don't believe that. So that's why you need to come out, you can't say partly say by yourself, but partly was said by people. So that is why now the high-level government, they're using the public opinion and those kind of public assessment to monitor what happened, the low-level government. At the same time, I listen to what their self-report, but also I will look at those people around you, what they look at your work. So that's basically using the polling as a kind of a governing tool to help them to manage the situation there. And second, of course, we consider about the possible bias if I get money from you, and I look at how many people support you, so that will be what's bias. Actually, most of this study, including all this international the study, self-sponsored study, and some other study, if we look at about, for example, mayor's performance, if we look at the new policy for Medicare, the new policy proposal of a Medicare system, all those issues would be more controversial. For the controversial issues, we will do self-sponsored study. So basically, the money is come from my company myself. It's actually, that's my model. I do in the market research, commercial side, and also the public side. I move part of my profit to support the public opinion polling. So then why I come out the result totally independent. And also the media, well, that's, I think, the space for the Chinese media. The progress is that if you talk about any criticism to top leadership, you got a problem. But if you target at specific policy and even local administration, that will be okay. So I think this is what I can see, as a local, the people living there, we do see that kind of a gluing of a space for that. So it's not using too much for a politician, especially for top politicians' work. But we do use it for more specific job, policy, government measure, social problem, and also target at the local official. So that's, I think, something, the different part of the picture. But I guess maybe in the near future, my best guess, like in 8 years, 10 years, we also look at what happened for these top leaders. Even I think at that time, the leaders, if you look at their personal background, will be weaker. So that's a more performance-driven times. So even the political system itself not have substantial change, but I think the dynamic, how to monitor the whole work would be changed a lot.
I want to say the following things about the polling that we've gotten from Victor and others in China. I look at the question results that we get on about national institutions one way versus the results that we get when we ask people about their lives. And everything that we've seen in these surveys, Victor, about how the Chinese view their lives makes sense. And it comports with what we find in other countries, and it comports with the trends that we see in public opinion global opinion about personal well-being over the past 5 years. Back in 2002, what our survey showed was that the Chinese didn't rate their lives very well, but they were tremendously optimistic about the future. This year, what we saw not only in China, but across a range of middle income, so to speak, and emerging nations, was an increase in satisfaction with life, an increase in satisfaction with incomes, a sense of personal progress. And our analysis correlated that pretty closely to the rise in gross domestic product in these countries over the past 5 years, which was notably greater than was the case for advanced nations, especially advanced Western European nations, where public satisfaction was flat. And China just fits right in on the regression line, with a tremendous rise in GDP and a really significant rise in satisfaction with life, a sense of progress, and so on and so forth, all of which is also qualified by the fact that the Chinese still do not rate their lives the way Western Europeans or Americans do. But this is a long-winded way of saying the Chinese data makes sense, especially when it comes to the questions that people can comfortably answer about their own experience. We also saw a decline in Chinese people saying that they had to do without with respect to food, with respect to clothing, healthcare, and so on. Thank you.
Let's open it to questions. Identify yourself, Professor Lampton.
Mike Lampton, and I want to thank all of you for the interesting presentations. It seemed, Victor, and earlier work you had done, Andrew, that the dissatisfaction around the world with the U.S. was, to put it, I guess, in the cliche, not with what we are, but what we do. That it's dissatisfaction with U.S. policy that accounts for the problem. And my question is, you said China is slipping somewhat, Andy, in its view that people hold of it around the world. And my question is that because of what China is, or as far as you can determine what China's doing, and if it's what's China doing, what is it doing wrong?
Well, I don't know if it's a matter of wrong. I think it's a matter of the issue. To answer your question directly, I think it has to do with what people see as what China now represents, as opposed to what it represented 5 years ago, 10 years ago. It's not policies in the sense of American policies are at the root of rising anti-Americanism. There are now other issues besides policies, but getting back to China, I don't think it's what China what China is at base or at core, but what the growing power of China, the threat, basically a threat of the growing power rather than the policies of China.
I will add one point, because this year we did a study in Africa, and I look at how the business community, local community, look at China's existence in Africa, especially expansion in Africa. Very interestingly, we do see that kind of so-called positive part and also negative part. I think the positive part mostly is about what the Chinese thinking and they want to do and declare to do, and especially historical impression. With those people with a so-called negative impression, very much relevant to what China's doing. And I think that China would be very careful about this possibly will follow the same American way when they expand its extent in globally. For example, the Chinese would be too much Chinese. For many Chinese aid projects and the Chinese work on the ground, we find that there's not enough Chinese talents that do know local situation. And of course, Chinese students would prefer to study United States or European countries. Very limited, almost no Chinese students want to study in African country, and new people want to intern there. So basically, new people really understand what happened in the society. So if with a real project there, then you only with a Chinese mentality to deal with things, just offend the people, even you bring the money. So I think that's a big problem. We check about many specific cases, And there are some cases that are very good. For example, the Chinese project about provided medicine for millennia in Africa, which is achieved pretty good success, and not only from marketing side, but also how they work together with a local hospital and work with a local NGO, try to access to people and effectively to access to this patient group and how to broadcast it. So that did pretty well. But most of Chinese projects, for example, they don't like work together with NGO, and they not trust too much to the ordinary people. And they believe Africa's people, someone like too lazy, the mind was problem. So it's not like a Chinese hard worker and you're so smart. So if you just using that way, if you do more, then just offend more. So I think that's really a time for Chinese if you want to achieve global progress. That was do more local study, local research, and work together and with a more local understanding, and also that fully about the so-called localization. That's many years we plan those the foreign organizations that are doing work in China that are not localized enough. But why something?
Eric McVeigh, the Institute for Foreign Policy Analysis. Victor, you mentioned the dislike for American hegemony. We occasionally hear from think tankers in China that they see benefits of the U.S. military presence in the region. I wonder what you think the general viewpoint of the U.S. military presence in South Korea and Japan and so forth.
Well, this is a very professional question. I think if for the general public, when they look at the extent, I think that would be quite different with the thinking with the, for example, professional military researchers, all those people. For example, I really heard from someone from the military think tank that say that the American military existence in Japan would constitute a kind of excuse or the reasons why Japan should not military they equip themselves enough. So it's kind of a constraint the military development from Japan. If Japan develop too much, there will be really a threat to China. But to Chinese, it's not that way. It's basically they look at the Japan and American work together and target at China. So I think that's, to many sense, the public opinion, public perception was its own limitation. Sentimental observation, or that's kind of so-called normal feeling, would be not fully understand the so-called professional operation. But of course, for professional work, they must do more to be transparent. So that's helped the public understand that. But basically, I think when they look at how Chinese look at American and they feel America's most unfriendly country, it's not about the Taiwan issue, but also when they look at American develop its relation with Japan, Korea, and partly with now Mongolia, Central Asia country in Kyrgyzstan also was a military existence there. So the Chinese, the general public will share with the concern with the official authority about, it's a kind of a way to American surrounding China. And it's even increased the concern that substantially American is a country not really share political value with China. So this developed partnership or this economy is a kind of a way, it's a strategically can share benefits, but substantially, long run, we are not really that kind of a partnership. Compared to Japan, U.S., like a relationship between the Japan and U.S., or compared to a relationship between China and the U.S., that's a different story. So I do think when I look at the 强国论坛, so the Power Country Forum in the People's website, the basic that's reflect that sentimental, the distrust the United States, really believe the United States would be honestly want to be, develop that kind of a long run partnership with China.
I have one comment on this, or one finding which might be interesting to you. Probably not surprising to you, the republics of the world have become uncomfortable with America's unrivaled military power, at least in the abstract. Large percentages of people say it would be a good thing if there were another country that was equal in military power to the United States. The Americans don't share that point of view, by the way. However, when we follow up and nominate China as the rival, not necessarily rival, it's not framed that way, but as the country that might become equal in military power to the United States, there is a resounding no in almost every country of the world in which we've posed the question.
Back here.
Josh Carton from the State Department. I hope I'm not misinterpreting Dr. Yuan's earlier comments that elite Chinese who may have more access to Western media may have more favorable views of America than the general population. So I'd like to go back to Mr. Orlean's first question or second question, which was, to what extent can we assign a score to China's managed media environment, a score either positive or negative, in affecting general Chinese views on the U.S.?
If you look at the Chinese media, no matter like People's Daily or the small media, even the any municipal evening the news, for the international edition, international mostly is about American edition. And most of the story there would be very positive. And we talk about, anybody win a police award, and the best company this year, and what kind of scientific findings, and all those positive things. Except for sometimes the first page, and it was a political policy conflict between China and the U.S. Then you can see the criticism. So mostly, another would be negative would be the shooting case, campus shooting. That shows that an American, even they say that that a good quality society, but even see so many unrest here. Basically, the normal information would be very positive. Actually, the government for this so-called social news, cultural news, was much less control. It's basically it's just for the editor you can collect and fill that space. That's more free. For the political ones, would be strictly well controlled, and usually only the news, Xinhua news agencies, their reports will be allowed to use. So for that side, it's more reflected the government side. So I think that's also, if you look at the structure of public opinion, and then you can see the people's attitude to majority parts of American things are positive, because that's quite correspondingly to match with the positive messages from the media. And for the policy side, it was much negative one. But also if you look at the policy sides, if we really began to get a big news, there would be government criticize America. And then you can see that. Of course, there are many times there was very positive things. For example, the economic dialogue, strategic economic dialogue. And all the time, they also achieve some very good news edition. But usually, the attitude to American policy would be not substantially changed. That's highly tied to president's attitude, and also people's impression about that president. So that's why I think even there are some of the small news about American would happen, but without the substantial symbolic belief, the behavior was done by the top leaders, will not really change that situation too much. And I think president and sometimes state secretary, they will be very representatively. They will deliver that kind of message to local audience.
We had somebody back here, and then her.
Hi, Tony Kane. I wanted to ask a question about if you do any polling on expectations that people have towards these various countries that you survey, because it seems to me that, in my experience, a lot of the anger at America comes from disappointment, that people have very high expectations about the way the United States should act in the world and are frequently, at least where I was living in China, disappointed with it. Whereas in Southeast Asia, where I've worked, I found that early low expectations of China because of the political legacy of China's role there made people not expect much, and then with the opening up, people's expectations tended to rise, and that had a lot to do with their positive attitude, that they were it was kind of a normative positive of what they were expecting rather than what they were experiencing. And I wonder if you look into expectations and how they influence the attitude towards both America and China in the world. And if I could also ask a question of Mr. Yuan, I just wanted to briefly ask on your methodology how broadly you're able to poll, because I've been living in Sichuan and I find that a lot of the attitudes that you reflect sound more like the way people think of Beijingers than the way they think of themselves.
With respect to expectations, while we don't ask that question directly, I think that you can pretty well draw an inference about expectations not being met with respect to America. If you compare the image of the United States when it was the sole superpower in the 1990s compared to 2001 to 2002 to 2007, I think the trend information that you presented from 61% to 30% is indicative of the way those expectations were not met in many places. That was in China, obviously. But I think that's an interesting way of looking at it. We don't do it directly, but inferentially, you certainly get there by comparing trends and looking at old images versus new images.
We don't have, in China, if we look at the national wide, we only have about a 40% of penetration rate of fixed phone. So usually if we do a national survey, we're not using a phone call interview. But in the city, if we only want to do middle class or the manager interview, we'll use a phone call interview. So if we do the national survey, for the sampling way would be, the typical way would be ad hoc plus multi-stage sampling. Ad hoc means we categorized all the cities, counties based on its sample, population size and also GDP level into different category, maybe 7, 10 category. For each category, purposely, we draw several locations. So that's ad hoc. So then when we come out that locations, all the locations usually composed of many residence committee and a village committee. So that will be our primary sampling unit. I mean, we got the sample committee from the list randomly, use a computer. Then when we got this committee, we was a map for each committee. The map will market the number of household. So the computer will help us randomly come out to draw out which household will be interviewed. So when we got this household, then we use a closest birthday way or the Kishi form to figure out who will be interviewed if there are several qualified interviews within that household. So that's our typical way. And also we're doing the face-to-face interview. The face-to-face interview in China so far is still workable, and gradually we have a more problem, especially in the cities with a more serious security problem. For example, in the more South Chinese cities, Guangzhou and the cities in the Zhejiang Delta area, they are more concerned about crime, so they will be very hesitant to open door for stranger interviewers. But in a place like Eastern China, it will be much better. But if for the people are richer, they also not really like open the door. So nowadays we develop in a more so-called combined way, which is basically for the middle and the low-end household, we're using face-to-face interview. And for the high-end, we're using phone call interview. Actually, the phone call interview is still very workable in China, and here with too many phone call marketing, so people will not likely really answer your question. But in China, they will be very curious about how can you find me, you know? So, and usually the typical refusal rate of the phone call interview would be 10 to 12%. But for the face-to-face interview, that will be high. The average would be 20 to 25%. And in the North China, in the Guangzhou, would be 40, 45 something. much higher. So that's what typical sample size here. I look at many phone call interview, there will be 1,000, 1,200 will reflect the national representative study. But in China, the typical national study, the sample size would be the minimum would be 3,500, and idealistically would be 5,000, 5,500.
I have a question just as a follow-up. The telephone calls you're making them to cell phones, though, no?
Mm-hmm. Not cell phone, because cell phone is really not proper for if you are in a questionnaire where the interview lasts more than 5 minutes. So that's just too long. And in China, we have a so-called a mutual charge way. I mean, not only I'll call you, I will pay. And if I got any phone call, I need to pay. So that is why people not really want to answer this question from stranger. So the best way is still using fixed phone to connect. But in case there's a study in the marketing research, sometimes we're using a cell phone because that's typically just like a 3 question, and each question answers yes or no. So you can use that, and even using short message to get the answer. So mostly cell phone is still not the best way to do the interview.
What are the equivalent rejection rates in the United States?
Oh, they can run as high as 40%. In our national surveys, higher in some places, lower in others, obviously. We are calling cell phones at this point because we're up to about 11% of the adult population cell phone only, and we're experimenting with shorter interviews on cell phones. They're not 3 or 4 questions. They're 5 or 10 minute, more like 10-minute interviews, and we pay people to do these interviews to take into account the fact that they have to pay, some of them have to pay a fee, most of them don't, but we still pay them.
We just have time for one last question, and I had said Herb could have that question, Herb Levin.
Herbert Levin.
And we have to keep it brief since our time is just about expired.
This is mostly for Professor Yuan. The Chinese have taught us the difference between different generations of leadership. Deng Xiaoping studied in France and Russia, and Zhou Enlai in Japan, Jiang Zemin, Zhu Enji. They grew up with foreigners in Shanghai and knew how to deal with them. The current generation of leaders, nobody speaks a foreign language, and the only guy to study abroad got a degree in engineering at the Kim Il-sung University in Pyongyang. And what the next other Chinese have said, these guys all refused to receive foreign investors when they were party secretaries in Gansu and so forth. So you foreigners have a tremendous job in getting to the present generation of leadership and showing them that you don't bite. What is your view of the attitude toward foreigners on the part of the leadership, and how does this filter down into the media and general attitudes in China? Thank you.
This is much more than public opinion. But I will say the answer some of with my own observation. Actually, I look at this generation, would it be more open than the past generation? From the sense of, in the past year, we sent out about 80,000 media level and above official to get a training outside, mostly Central United States. And the next year, we'll have a so-called 100,000 official training program. And still, they consider, Americanism very important. And Kennedy School was, ironically, was said by some people as a fourth party school of Chinese Communist Party. And in Maryland, the Maryland University was, they will have a partnership with the Beijing, the Department of Organization of the Communist Party in Beijing Municipal City. So you can see that for this, not necessarily they personally they get overseas education, but they do realize the importance of that. And most of the Chinese, the lawyers were sent to UK to accept the training. So very interestingly, in the bureaucracy level, it was that kind of, open, and it's not like using party school way to figure out all those things. Party school way now is using for, of course, ideological training for men. But if you consider about skill, new governance, they very much, this administration is very much very much emphasize this so-called Western discipline. The mayor, so if again, there are so many mayor classes, Central United States, and of course, on the center to Singapore. So I think if you look at all this operational way, that's very much different with the older generation. And when I talk about they're using so-called public performance way to look at the low government, it's also about the so-called operational. So I think even the current administration, they don't like a so-called political system, the terminology. They like a so-called improvement of public administration. So if you do like technically or operationally, they're pretty welcome and open for that. I think that's also important. That's the way they just want to make things done and accumulate enough energy in some area, then they move the substantial reformation forward. So this thinking is actually is something different with the Deng Xiaoping. Deng Xiaoping is more like, find a big point and we do something first. And this way it's more like accumulate the resource consensus in somewhere first, then move forward. So I think that's my observation to that.
Let me thank the Pew Research Center for providing this wonderful venue, and let me thank our speakers for really what was a fascinating discussion. Thank you so much.